In this video, we'll look at solving linear equations. Now, it is assumed that you already know the order of operations and that you know in what order to undo those order of operations when you are solving a linear equation. So it is expected that you've seen linear equations before and that this is a refresher. Key ideas to remember is that whatever operation you perform on one side of the equals sign must be done on the other side of the equals sign also in order to balance the equation. You can think of it like you have a scale that's balanced on one side and the other side. If you take 3 things from the right side of the scale, you have to take 3 things from the left side of the scale in order to keep it balanced. Same thing with the equal sign. That's like the center of your scale. And if you take something or add something to one side, you have to take or add the same thing to the other side. If you have fractions, multiply every term by the lowest common denominator first, and that will clear your fractions and make it a slightly easier problem to solve. So let's go ahead and do a couple examples. Our first one is -6 equals the quantity 10 minus x quantity over 4. Now I want to get rid of that denominator of 4. So the first thing I'm going to do is multiply both sides of my equation by 4. So on the left side, I'll have 4 times -6 equals 4 times 10 minus x in parentheses over 4. Now 4 over 4 is equivalent to 1. So 4 over 4 would cancel and just leave me with a 1 there in front of the 10 minus x. And so I could just write it as 10 minus x. So my new equation becomes -24 equals 10 minus x. Now I want to get x by itself, and so I have to move that 10 to the other side. In order to do that, I have to make it cancel on the right-hand side. So I'll subtract 10, and as long as I do the exact same thing to the right side of the equation, my equation is still balanced. So I'm subtracting 10 from both sides. Now I have -34 equals -x, and that negative in front of the x is just like a -1 being multiplied to the x. So to undo that, I'll divide by -1, and I have to do it on both sides of my equal sign. So I end up with -34 over -1, which would give me a +34. And then -x over -1 would leave me with x. So x equals 34 is my solution. I'm done at that point because there's nothing added or subtracted or multiplied or divided with the x. Now, if I wanted to check, what I would do is I would plug 34 into my original equation. So -6 equals 10 minus 34 divided by 4. And I would go ahead and pull up the calculator. Here I have Desmos.com, the scientific calculator on Desmos.com. Now the left side of the equals sign is -6, so there's nothing to put in my calculator there. The right side is 10 minus 34, close my parentheses, and divide by 4, and I get -6. So the left-hand side and right-hand side of my original equation are equal when I plug in a 34 for x. And so that checks out, and I know that I got the correct solution. All right, let's look at a slightly more complicated equation. Here I have one with several fractions. I have negative 1/5 W minus 1/3 equals 4/5 W plus 7. Now, when I have fractions, one thing I can do is look for a lowest common denominator and then multiply everything in the equation by that lowest common denominator. And that will clear the fractions. And then I can solve like I did before. So my denominators here are 5, 3, and 5. Now the lowest common denominator is the lowest common multiple of those two. So one way to do that is to just list out the multiples. So like 5 times 2 is 10, 5 times 3 is 15, 5 times 4 is 20, 5 times 5 is 25. Let me list out some of the multiples of 3. 3 times 2 is 6, 3 times 3 is 9, 3 times 4 is 12, 3 times 5 is 15. Oh, there I have one in common. So my lowest common multiple of the denominators is 15. So I would have the lowest common denominator or LCD in this case is 15. It's the lowest common multiple of the denominators. All right, now here's the trick, is you take that lowest common denominator, you're going to multiply every single term in your equation by that lowest common denominator. So let me rewrite my equation, and I'll leave a little space between each term. So I'll have negative 1/5 W minus, and then I'll leave a little space and put my 1/3 equals, I'll leave some space in front of the 4/5 W plus, and then I'll leave some space in front of the 7. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come through and multiply every term by 15. So first I have 15 times negative 1/5 W minus 15 times the 1/3 equals 15 times 4/5 W plus 15 times 7. And now it's time to cancel, if I can. So what I will do is I'll look at multiplying 15 times negative 1/5. Now the 15, I can treat it like it's over a 1. So it's a numerator. So it would multiply to the numerator here. So I can go ahead and cancel with the denominator. And so I would say 15 over 5 is 3. On the next one, I have a 15, and then in the denominator, I have a 3, and 15 over 3 is 5. Next, I have 15 times 4/5. So I could go ahead and do 15 times 4 is 60 and then divide by 5, or I can simplify before multiplying. So 15 over 5 gives me a 3. And so now I'm ready to multiply whole numbers together. So I have here 3 times negative 1, so negative 3W. 5 times 1, so minus 5, equals 3 times 4W, so 12W. And then plus 15 times 7. If you're not sure about 15 times 7, you can use the Desmos calculator. So I have 15 times 7 gives me 105. So I'll go ahead and do plus 105. Now I have a much simpler looking equation. Negative 3w minus 5 equals 12w plus 105. And I want to go ahead and solve this. So I want to move all of my w terms to one side. I'm going to move them all to the left-hand side. So I'll subtract 12w from both sides of my equation. And I want to move that minus 5 to the other side of the equal sign. So I'm going to go ahead and add 5 to both sides. Make sure you're lining up those terms with their like terms on the other side. All right, so now I have on the left-hand side of the equal sign, negative 3w minus 12w gives me negative 15w. Negative 5 plus 5, those cancel each other out, equals 12w minus 12w, those cancel each other out, and then 105 plus 5, so equals 110. So I have negative 15w equals 110, and my final step would be to divide both sides by negative 15. That's what will give me my solution. And so if you want to use a calculator to simplify, you can. You would put in 110 divided by negative 15. And if you were asked for the exact answer, there's this button here to convert your answer to a fraction. That would be your exact answer, negative 22 thirds. So I get W equals negative 22 over 3. And just like the last example, I could go ahead and check my solution by plugging in negative 22 thirds into my original equation. So I would have negative 1/5 times negative 22 thirds minus 1/3 equals 4/5 times negative 22 thirds plus 7. All right, now let me drag my calculator over to the left side, and I'll go ahead and put in negative, and then your fraction key is right here, and then you can put in 1/5 times negative 22 over 3 minus 1/3. And I'm going to convert that to a fraction, so 17 over 15. The right-hand side is 4/5 times negative 22 over 3 plus 7. I'll convert that to a fraction. So 17 over 15 equals 17 over 15. So the left-hand side of the equation equals the right-hand side of the equation when I plug in my answer of -22/3 for W. So checking told me that I got the correct answer. We're going to look at one more example with a word problem dealing with linear equations. David will rent a car for the weekend. He can choose one of two plans. The first plan has an initial fee of $50 and costs an additional 80 cents per mile driven. The second plan has no initial fee, but costs 90 cents per mile driven. We want to know how many miles would David need to drive for the two plans to cost the same. So costing the same means that we want to set up an equality or an equation. So I want to figure out the cost of the first plan. The first plan has an initial fee of $50 and an additional 80 cents per mile driven. So additional means I'm adding, and I would add 0.80, and I'm going to let M equals the number of miles. So I would have 0.80 times M. The second plan is going to be no initial fee, but 90 cents per mile driven. So that would be 0.90 M because it's per mile driven. And now I just have to solve that. So I want to get all of my M terms on the same side. I'll subtract 0.80 M from both sides. So I have 50 on the left side of the equal sign and 0.10 M on the right side. Now we always divide by the number that's attached to the variable. And so I would want to divide by 0.10 in order to get M by itself. And you could just put 0.1, they're equivalent. But for some people, they like to write it out exactly as they see in the word problem. All right, so I need 50 divided by 0.1. 50 divided by 0.1 or 0.10 is 500. So I end up with 500 equals M. And that would be my solution. The two plans cost the same when the mileage is 500 miles. So a couple reminders: when you're solving an equation, whatever you do to one side of the equal sign, you have to do the exact same thing to the other side of the equal sign. Also, if you have fractions in your equation, you can go ahead and multiply by the lowest common denominator in order to clear the fractions.